So let's take a look what RFID is all about, some ideas on how it works, some of the more common frequency ranges that we can be using with RFID, talk about the differences in technology and how the devices can be powered, the types of information they can pass as a result, and then spend a lot of time focusing on the low frequency and high frequency passive RFID. Look at some of the contactless smart cards and ultimately start looking at what some of the attack surface looks like. All right, so what is this RFID stuff? It is yet another wireless protocol, significantly different than some of the ones we've examined from Zigbee, Z-Wave, DECT, Wi-Fi, and so forth. The intent here is for, in most cases, very minimal transfer of data at very short range using little to no power. We have some specific applications where RFID excels, specifically for very close contact type of environments, point of sale, authentication, and or physical access control systems, inventory analysis, and some of those types of things. We'll see some longer range stuff in similar types of activities, but the technology becomes a little bit more complex there as well. Okay. The point is here that we needed something simple to be able to do close proximity sort of authentication and inventory tracking stuff. But all of the other protocols we've interacted with have required some fairly significant hardware requirements, power requirements, and there was just too much overhead and too much cost and too much implementation cost for these to happen. We come into for day 5, and right on some of the first slides here, I'm met with nostalgia when we were putting together the RFID NFC type of stuff. Josh started in on some of it, and he knew I had a bunch of RFID equipment and asked if he could borrow my box full of RFID gear. So one of the pictures that he had taken is this particular RFID receiver. It is for reading EM4102 series RFID tags that spit out a unique number, and it's USB based, and it acts as a keyboard wedge. So it reads the tag and it takes the data from the tag and spits it out to the computer like it's a keyboard. This was one of Larry's first RFID readers, and the memories it has are kind of interesting. Many years ago on the Security Weekly podcast, we started to think about moving into doing some video. And one of the first video segments that we captured was of me sitting at Paul's kitchen table with a bunch of medical supplies, and a friend of mine and the podcast, Nick DiPetrillo, and I actually did an RFID implant in my hand at Paul's kitchen table. So yeah, I have an RFID implant in my hand. It's still there. It still works. And this keyboard wedge I attached to my computer at work because I set the password to my Active Directory account to the unique number that would spit out of my tag. So when I needed to authenticate to my computer, type my username in and go boop, and I'm logged in. Later years actually removed the latch from the door and put in an electronic latch to my office. And I had an RFID reader in the window right next to the door. So I didn't even need to use my keys. I could just boop, and it would electronic latch the door open. So, and then my password didn't meet password policies anymore. Oh well. But we talked about all of that with the intent of, I'll be the victim, and you guys can play with my stuff and sort of understand what using some of these systems may cause for risk in some of the environments. As part of a demo, when one of the tools we talk about, Adam Laurie, or Major Malfunction at ShmooCon 2, had heard that I had the implant and that I was using it to unlock my computer. He asked if he could clone my RFID tag on stage at ShmooCon and use it to authenticate to my computer. And the answer was, oh, hell yes. This is why I got it, so that people could play with it in sort of a real-world environment. let's talk about some of the things that we're doing here. RFID has a bunch of frequency ranges that can be used. We are typically seeing high frequency and low frequency RFID tags or RFID-based technology in the 13.56 megahertz for high frequency and 120 to 134 to 140 to 148 for the low frequency. Those are arguably the most ubiquitous and are extremely short range. We do also see some 433 megahertz, sub 1 gigahertz, i.e. 900-ish megahertz for ultra high frequency, and then 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz RFID tags. Yep, using typically Wi-Fi based technologies to send similar types of information. Now, depending on the frequency range and the technologies in use, we will see a distinct change in the way we power these devices in an active or a passive state. Typically, the high frequency and the low frequency tags down here in the bottom are going to be passive, meaning they have no battery. And we'll talk about how we get power to them. And typically on the UHF and the ISM band ones, there is some sort of power with a battery and may engage in a hybrid-based approach for when it receives some signal to power up and then emitting at higher power after it sort of received that initial kick to turn on. So we'll talk about some of those. So an active tag with some power, constant power, and a passive with no power, harvesting it from the environment. Active RFID are those with battery and that have the ability to transmit at significantly longer range. We'll have the transponder and the receiver. So the transponder being the tag itself, the receiver typically being in a fixed location, whether it be for a payment terminal or for near some doors for doing inventory. The one that I'm most familiar with in this range is the EasyPass transponder, sub 1 gigahertz, 915 megahertz in New England. We have the EasyPass system for doing electronic toll collection. My understanding is that these are a hybrid active tag in that they do have a battery, but the battery lasts quite a long time. And it would make sense to me that they receive RF from the environment to trigger the turn on of use of the battery so that they can transmit at longer distances. It's either that or they're transmitting on battery at very low power with some interval. Why? You have to slow down at the toll collection stuff. Yet they're doing it really well at 65 or 80 miles an hour on the highway now too. Okay. So they do have a battery and they are powered all of the time and the batteries could potentially need to be replaced. The receiver is always actively powered, typically plugged into the wall and is listening for those devices to respond. With the passive RFID, the receiver is always powered, whether it be battery or with wall power. And it is constantly emitting RF energy out of a coil. So it is sending RF energy out, which is an electromagnetic wave, which when received by the tag, a coil on the tag harvests that electromagnetic energy and turns that back into power. So it's inductive inductive coupling, very similar to the wireless charging stuff that you'd see on your phone, in that there's no wire. We're actually using RF energy to stimulate the electromagnetic frequencies in the wires and a coil in the device. And once that electromagnetic energy has been received by the coil, turns it back to an electricity. And on the passive tags, it receives just enough, because it doesn't need a whole lot, to power the device. The device powers up, spits out its unique numbers, and then turns off. And then it harvests more energy and turns on and spits those unique numbers back out. So it doesn't require battery, making it significantly more flexible from an application standpoint in that there's no battery to leak. They're typically waterproof. They can be actually flexible in their construction, so they can be bendable, and are very, very inexpensive to be able to be used. I think the passive ones are the ones that we see most often. Again, removes the danger of potential battery leakage and those types of things, and the need to replace them, and their overall size due to that. For example, my implant in my hand is not much larger than a grain of rice because there's no battery. And I have no worries about a battery leaking under my skin because, well, there isn't one. And it's actually implant grade glass. The interesting one at the time when I was getting that implant is that there were no implants that were certified for human use. For dogs and cats, absolutely you could get them, and laboratory mice. So I had to do a little social engineering to convince the company to sell me a couple of product samples, because you can only order them by the thousands, and that I was going to use them for laboratory animal tracking for a university in their medical sciences department. Well, I happened to work for worked for a hospital that was a teaching hospital for a university that had a medical sciences department. I just didn't work in the department, so I had letterhead and all that type of stuff. So, but it worked, and they sold me just a couple because that's all I needed. So, lots of these are arguably the most ubiquitous that we find. I think about the application of the passive tags. Lots of use for these, and we'll see some of these in use in some retail environments for asset tracking and inventory. High frequency versus low frequency design choices, using some different frequency ranges. The low frequency are going to be significantly more expensive, are going to be simpler to implement, simpler to use, and they're going to be much lower frequency, lower capability. They're typically going to be those devices that are have a static unique number, globally unique for the world, and maybe limited reprogrammability. The range can be a little bit longer, given that the frequency just is lending itself to longer transmission distances, and with some reasonable antennas better as well. Because of their simplicity, they're also less expensive, and lots of application because of that inexpensive cost. The high frequency is better for doing longer, more amounts of data transmissions because they have some more flexibility for being able to do more capabilities on the chips themselves. They are a little bit more complicated to implement. But with that complication comes the ability to have improved security and the potential options for us as we move into some of the NFC side, the ability to do bidirectional data transfer as well. I think that's one thing we want to make sure that we're clear on, is that we're talking about RFID smart cards and NFC, and they're all based on the same base RFID technology from an application perspective. It's now just how we've taken this protocol and this technology and implemented some sort of data exchange over it. NFC, while we can transfer lots of data and be able to have bidirectional data communications, it's all based on high frequency RFID. It's the same underlying radio frequency mechanisms, but with additional adaptation and expansion of its actual application layer use. Okay. We're starting to see the move to high frequency RFID designs, although I still suspect that we're going to have a lot of low frequency stuff in the environment. Largely because they are so inexpensive. Thinking about why they're so inexpensive, and maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. For a number of years ago, there was a very large retailer that was concerned about how it could manage its assets, perform logistics, and do asset management, both in its warehouses and its stores. So it said to anyone that wanted to sell their products in their stores, said, you will equip your products with an RFID tag so that we can match your product, and we can wander around our stores and or in and out of the doors and or in active states on stuff on the ceiling, that we can perform accurate inventory by just scanning RFID on the articles that are in our store. So we now can have very fine-grained control of all of the logistical problems and where all of our products are, both in the stores, potentially even on the trucks in transport and in our warehouses. We're going to inventory everything with RFID. If you don't put the RFID in your products, sorry, we're not going to sell it. The logistical concerns for trying to manage non-RFID products, untenable for us. That retailer was Walmart, the single largest retailer here in the US and its brands. So Sam's Club and others. So if you wanted to have your stuff sold in Walmart or Sam's Club, it had RFID somewhere in the packaging so they could do asset management. And that is still my understanding today, that they're using low frequency RFID to do so. So sometimes when you buy stuff at Walmart and you open the box and there's that little sheet that has like a little white sticker on it, RFID. Not anti-theft like they used to have, like in the record stores and the tape stores. You remember those? When you had to walk through those two upright bars and then it beeped? Yeah, they still have stuff like that. But typically those are not anti-theft. They are in fact RFID for doing asset management. Okay? And we'll see some of these coming up. Contactless smart cards are an application of RFID technology using the same physical layers and the protocol itself, with some additional feature set on top of it, including some potential security there, the ability for us to do bidirectional reads in a device that is a form factor with an antenna and the chip for the RFID technology itself, typically in a credit card type of format. Depending on the capabilities and the chip decisions for these systems, they can be either read-only or read-write. And we typically see these applications for the smart cards themselves with the application layer security for payment transactions, banking, parking, and mass transit. With these solutions, the receiver and transponder takes on a little bit different set of names. We have the proximity coupling device, or the PCD. This is the reader. Okay? And then we have the proximity integrated circuit card, or the PIC, and this is the actual smart card itself. When we start moving this into NFC, where we can potentially do bidirectional communication and mutual authentication, and the ability for us to do larger data transfers with similar types of technology, we will also be referring to the actual hardware devices as PCDs and PICs. But to do bidirectional data transfer, this is one way. The PCD reads data from the PIC, and if we want to do bidirectional data transfer, we can't, but we can dynamically make those change roles with NFC. So the PCD becomes the PIC, and the PIC becomes the PCD, and we do transfer that way, and then they switch, and then we do transfer the other way, and then they switch, and they do transfer the other way. So they have the ability to change roles within some NFC stuff. That said, NFC is an adaptation of RFID-based technology for doing multiple reads against a single card to obtain more data, or the ability for us to exchange roles dynamically so that we can do bidirectional communication. So both devices are acting as the PCD and the PIC. And the ability for us to have some NFC stuff becomes interesting in that we can now expand the use of this technology because we can do the bidirectional transfer. We can potentially implement some application layer security. And we can do larger data transfers with those multiple reads. We're typically seeing NFC's adoption in the mobile phone market, given that there's a reasonable amount of power there as opposed to something like a smart card that is powered by the environment. So I love some of these uses for NFC. It now starts to become terrifying to place our mobile device against some NFC reader, and you really don't know what it's going to give you, do you? We'll talk about some of those types of attacks. The one-touch suggestion box or the open virtual house. Yeah, you can scan the QR code, or you could place your NFC-based phone here and it will give you that same information. Yeah, this seems like a good idea. Okay. What could go wrong? So let's talk about some of the attack surface. Okay. We have lots of things for us to think about while we're moving through. One, we're going to delve into the privacy type of attacks, and then we'll expand on that with some additional technologies as well. We'll look at data disclosure from interacting with the cards, specifically around something like the smart card. We'll talk about cloning and emulating the cards. I finally did get a chance to see Blade Runner, 2020, or the new one? I can't remember the number. I actually enjoyed it. It was pretty good. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the first one, but I didn't expect it to be the same because it wasn't the first one. All right. We'll talk about some cloning and emulation. We'll talk about replay-based attacks. We'll talk about breaking the crypto systems in use. And then what happens when we create our own card with data that is unexpected, and how is that interpreted upstream? Like, instead of having a unique number, what happens if we injected JavaScript or SQL injection? Well, it might not affect the reader itself, but that reader is sending data to another system that is potentially interacting with other things, maybe storing data in a SQL database, or maybe it's we put some JavaScript there, and the system administrator then goes and views the logs, and sure enough, the log has that, oh, hey, Larry badged in, but Larry's badge said it had some JavaScript of pop-up. So they go to view the logs, and the browser starts doing bad things. So what happens to that data when it's injected to the back-end systems? Okay. RFID and NFC is typically very short range, in the 3 to 5 centimeter range, which makes man-in-the-middle and sniffing and eavesdropping quite difficult. Because typically if you have any of that type of gear in any of those proximities, the users are going to know and or can have been trained now to start looking at some of those types of things, especially like in the banking and ATMs and gas pumps and those types of things, that they look for those readers. Every time I go to a gas pump, I pull on the stuff, and I pull hard because I've yet to find one, because I want one. I haven't found a skimmer yet, and I want one. I guess I'm just not going to the wrong places or the right places, depending on your matter of perspective. So, being able to do man-in-the-middle and sniffing for these is incredibly difficult just because of the physical proximity needed for the devices. However, replay and proxy-based attacks are absolutely reasonable in that I could take say a mobile device connected to a fairly low latency network, cellular or Wi-Fi, and potentially query your card while on the subway, sending that data outbound over cellular to a co-conspirator who receives it and then can emulate that while at the 7-Eleven. So we could potentially have the ability for us to relay that data in potentially near real time, and we'll see some of these attacks as well. There have been some studies looking at being able to do sniffing of some of the RFID stuff in some pretty decent distances, 5 meters, 15 feet. And I've also seen some cases where being able to do surreptitious reads without the user's knowledge over a significant distance is also possible. Kristen Paget did some research a number of years ago where she was attempting to do long-range RFID technology reads. And she did a talk at DEF CON where she set up her equipment on the front table while doing her talk, and it utilized a surplus, electronic surplus wireless amplifier, something on the order of a couple of 100 watts, when these things are supposed to be fractions of watts. So she was sending lots of RF energy out into the environment, and then was using an antenna that had some very excellent attenuation and receive sensitivity. As part of her talk, they had some of the DEF CON goons handing out RFID tags to people as they were walking in the room and said, "Go spread out, because we want to see how many we can read in this room." From significant distance, 60, 70, 100, 200 feet. She was pretty successful. In her testing, she actually went out to a park and set up this equipment in a park, and then saw how far she could read in free space. And what she found was when she started getting too close to the chain link fence, the read ranges actually improved because it was bouncing off of the fence. Like, that's kind of cool. In some of the video series that she had done out of some of that research, she would set this equipment up in her car and would point the antenna out the window of her car and like drive around downtown San Francisco, and would be able to read RFID badges that were within the building on the first floor from 100 feet away or so. Like, wow. Typically 3 to 5 centimeters, but with a determined attacker, we could potentially read this data from significant distances. So it's not easy, and there was lots of things that she had to overcome. All right, so looking at rounding out sort of the discussion about what RFID is, a low range, low power wireless protocol with a couple of different components, the transponder and the receiver being the reader, the transponder being the tag. We also changed that to the PIC, the card, and the PCD, the reader, when we start moving into some of the NFC type stuff. We have a bunch of different frequency ranges that we can use, and whether we choose to use active or passive type technologies will determine some of those frequency ranges and back and forth. The active RFID stuff, the tag itself, the transponder does require constant power. And maybe we even have the opportunity for a hybrid based approach in that we don't start transmitting with the battery power until we receive some RF energy to power up some other circuit. And we see lots and lots of adoption of both low frequency and high frequency. Low frequency, the most simple of those, lots of asset tracking and inventory, and potentially even still some authentication. As well as high frequency with contactless smart cards, and then NFC as well. Let's take a look at some low frequency RFID attacks. And you guys are going to do a lab on doing some analysis on an unknown low frequency RFID tag using the Proxmark 3 tools in offline mode, as it were. So doing some sort of signals analysis and seeing how we can start to put together some unknown tags for doing additional analysis and how you may use them in the field. So good stuff there as well. We're going to talk about the low frequency tags, where they're used and where they excel. We'll talk about some cloning tools, one of them with the Rfid or the RFID IO tools for doing some cloning against low frequency tags. We'll also be talking about the HID Prox 2 and introducing the Proxmark 3 specifically around the RDV2 models, and some discussion about some of the tool there, because I get lots of questions about why did you pick this one? Okay, so and then we'll talk about doing some manual analysis. What happens when I find a tag and I have no idea what it is on the low frequency side? How do I go about figuring out how I should be interacting with that card. So low frequency, good for asset tracking, point of sale systems and so forth, very inexpensive, and was some of the initial stuff that we started to see for access control systems in various varieties, whether they be unique tag numbers with EM41, 41X series, and moving into HID globals systems as well for access control, and we'll be talking about these various systems. Okay. Typically, in the low frequency side, we're going to present the card to the reader. The reader is going to energize the card through induction, will power up its radio and spit out a very small chunk of information, typically a unique number. So it is a one-way operation. It is half duplex. So very simplified output coming from the RFID tags. There are a bunch of different standards. Everybody wanted to get on board when we started seeing this, so not all of them interoperate. But there are some that are found to be of the most plentiful varieties. Once we've figured out what type of tag it is, cloning those with various tools is pretty darn easy. So let's take a look at one of the scenarios when these get used. For performing some authentication, in this case, it is a major bike rental company located here in the US, which is a pay-for service. You go and sign up, you give them a credit card, and they issue you a card that is a low-frequency RFID tag. You want to borrow a bike, you present your card, which identifies you, to the reader, and it unlocks the bike and says, hey, Larry has borrowed this bike. Great. No problem. That sounds kind of cool. But what type of technologies are they using for that, and how is the authentication actually done? Right. So how do we go about analyzing these cards that these bike rental companies are using here in the U.S.? One way we can do this is with the ACG low and high frequency reader and writer. ACG Technologies has got some pretty interesting stuff. They're a little bit expensive for some of the other technologies that we've seen, but are absolutely a very reliable solution. The ACG devices reader-writer for radio is tied to a USB cable, which is USB serial over USB. And it gives us a bunch of ability to read and or write low frequency and high frequency cards with a bunch of the different more common standards. Okay? And we can also do some emulation as well. So we have some potential hardware. We need some software to support those operations because it is not a standalone device. One of those tools is the RFID IO tools, otherwise known as Rfid by Adam Laurie, or Major Malfunction. He was one of the pioneers in looking into some of the RFID stuff in the security industry and wrote his tools in Python. And when it was one of his first Python projects that he ever did, and he says that he felt like an idiot because he didn't know enough Python, but he put together this successful suite of tools. So hence the name of Rfid. It's RFID IO tools. So it's a play on his feel about what he did when he started writing this. He felt like an idiot. So his set of tools with the Rfid tools give us the ability to use multiple different reader-writer types to interact directly with the cars when present. In this case, we're looking to see if we can get some information from the card using card select, and we're telling it that we're using the ACG reader and it's connected to a specific serial port. We'll interact with the serial port and attempt to read the card. And in this case, it read the card and it was able to determine the type and spit out the card's unique identifier. Well, that was easy. That number is what identifies me to the bike rental system. Now that we know what that number is, wouldn't it be cool if we could make another copy of that card so I could share it with my significant other or 300 of my closest friends so that we could rent all of the bikes all the time? That could be kind of neat. Okay. So using the Rfid IO tools and the ACG reader, we've read the card, we found the unique number for this card. We can now use it to clone back to a new copy of the card. It does require us to have a special kind of card to do that writing to. It is a Q5 writable tag. On the Q5 writable tags, when you're finding them from a reputable place, they run $8 to $10 a piece. You can definitely get them cheaper, and I have seen them cheaper. The Q5 tags have their own proprietary format, but they are also excel at emulating a couple of different tag types, including EM41X series tags. So they're multi-purpose. They can do Q5 and they can emulate other tag types, and they're writable. So we can use the data that we've acquired, that card number, and write that with the ACG reader and the Rfid IO tools back to a new card that is writable, and that will emulate the same tag type that we read it from. So taking a look at this, we're going to use FDXB num, and we're going to tell it which reader we're using. We're using the ACG reader, which serial port it's connected to, and then the data that we recovered in the first step from the read of our bike rental tag, and then we're going to write it. Place the card on the reader, hit enter, and it says, hey, there's a tag here. It's a Q5 tag with this identifier. Do you want to overwrite this and have it emulate EM4X series tags? Yes, I want to make a copy. Writes the data to the tag, and then when this tag is then read with card select, it will present the same number as it did as the original. So we've just made a copy of the bike rental company's tags. Another one that we see a lot for physical access control systems is the HID Prox Card 2. 125 kilohertz, low frequency tags. And according to Stephanie Ardilli, the product manager at HID Global, a capture of about 70 to 80% of all of the physical access control systems in the US and in many other places worldwide. Specifically, her figure was for the US at 70 to 80% of the market. That is staggering for the amount of deployments here in the US for these systems. I see them all over the place. They can be used for access control for exterior portions of the building, interior stuff. You could potentially even use them to do authentication to computer systems. Typically, we are seeing them for physical access control systems. And they are, in fact, very inexpensive. I can identify the readers quite easily. Some of the readers have a second factor authentication with a PIN on them as well. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can potentially get around those as well. Okay. The cards are inexpensive. And then oftentimes what happens is we go to buy new cards for our system and we buy the updated, more secure I-class systems, but we don't replace the readers, and the readers that may have been installed in our quote legacy are still using HID 2. So while you may think you're secure with those I-class version cards, they're being used in backwards compatibility mode with Prox 2 actual readers and are not reaping any of the benefits of the additional I-class security that they developed. So loads of these all over the place. Let's take a look at one of these type of access control system. We have our card and our access control reader to allow us access into the 617 classroom. The reader performs the RF portion for reading the HID here, and then translates that data to the Wiegand protocol for transport over a wire to an access controller. Regardless of the access controller, this one happens to be one from HID. They make third-party controllers, you name it. As long as these controllers can speak the Wiegand protocol, they can process the data from the card to determine whether or not that should be access granted or not, either stored locally for that database on the controller or communicating to some third-party software for larger installations and more widespread as opposed to just one door controller. Okay. So some interesting things to think about. There's at least another spot for us to attack this solution in this scenario. Well, one, we could potentially recover and clone cards and deal with the RF part. But we're transmitting this stuff now over a wire that may be in an unprotected location. The reader is outside of the door. So we can remove the reader from the wall and then interact with the wire as it's using a standards-based protocol. And then we now get some other RF technologies involved here as well. Some of the tools that I've used here, there are two varieties. One is the ESP key, and the other one is the BLE key. They are very small circuit boards, one powered by battery, one powered by vampire power from the wire that is powering the reader. And it has the ability for us to punch it down on the wire without breaking the wire, effectively tapping the two transmission lines for the Wiegand protocol. These devices can speak Wiegand. They listen to Wiegand as it leaves the controller. RF, now we're capturing the Wiegand protocol on the wire. It can translate the Wiegand protocol on the wire and then stores it on the device. The two devices are interesting in that one is Bluetooth based, so I can connect to it with my phone over Bluetooth with an app on my phone, and I can interact with that. Oh, someone just badged in and I now have their card number. I can potentially take that card and then do it from the command line to clone it. The better one is now I'm communicating it with Bluetooth, and I can select and replay. And it takes that number and translates it back to the Wiegand protocol, injects it to the wire, and then the door opens. The ESP key uses ESP8266 Wi-Fi module. So it stands up an access point in the environment, rogue access point, or it connects outbound to your, as a client, to your access point, rogue access point in the environment. Similar type of operations. When you start seeing these readers with the keypads, those also become interesting in that, oh, well, I captured the badge, or I have a copy of the badge, but I don't have the pins. How are the pins sent back to the door controller? Wiegand protocol. So if I have one of those devices capturing the Wiegand protocol, I can replay the pins too. So the hosted course for the physical security stuff, with, I think it's John, Deviant, and Babak. Babak is the technology guy and has been working on the ESP and BLE keys. When we were using some of these, I put in a feature request to Babak. I called him up and said, hey man, I love being able to replay pins via the ESP and the BLE keys. The problem is I don't want to have to keep going, play this number, play this number, play this number, play this number. I want to be able to go, tick, 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 play these back. So I can take the card and then the pins and then play them all back as opposed to having to pay them individually. He's like, that's a great idea. No bus pirate. It's literally, you're literally taking the wire and punching it down like you would like a phone block, but not cutting it off. Okay. So it's just observing the changes in the electrical signal for the Wiegand protocol, and then interpreting it. So the system on a chip for either the BLE or the ESP key will do all of the watching, and it's a self-contained processor. Then stands up a web server. You connect to it via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and then you're using like a web browser to interact with it. Okay. All self-contained. Neat stuff. Some other fun ones to think about. Yes, you have to remove the reader from the wall. Typically, it's one little screw you undo and it pops off. And they say, well, Larry, don't these things are sensitive. These are authentication mechanisms. These are physical security controls. Don't they have tamper detection on those readers? The answer is yes. Yes, they do have tamper detection. But for every one of the readers that I have encountered, the tamper detection is ignored because the tamper detection is not triggered via the Wiegand protocol. The tamper detection is triggered via another set of dry contacts, another wire itself, so outside of the protocol. And some of them have like a tilt sensor. Another one will have a light sensor so that when you pull it off, all of a sudden it sees light or the light changes. So it can trigger a tamper event. What I find oftentimes is when you're installing multiple of these readers, when you're going into the build or the design phase of the construction, you have to make some decisions about components and cost. And if the Wiegand reader requires 2 for Wiegand, 1 for ground, and 1 for power, you need a 4-strand cable to go to each of these readers. But if you want to do tamper detection, you need 5. So they price out a 4-strand cable and a 5-strand cable, and say the 4-strand cable is $1 a foot, and the 5-strand cable is $1.25 a foot. And then you look at the overall cost, and one's $20,000 and for the 4-strand, and the other one is $22,000 for the 5-strand. Which one do you think they pick? The cheaper, with the 4-strand, which then no longer gives us that extra wire, so we cannot do tamper detection. So this is often what I find is that people get cheap. They don't want to spend the extra $2,000 on the physical infrastructure for the cable, and then prevents them from doing tamper detection. So it makes it super easy for us to put these on the devices with no detection. Sometimes on the front entrances, they'll have cameras. But what if they're in a multi-tenant facility and there's one of these on the back stairwell for the fire escape so you can get back in that way and there is no camera? They'll never see you take the thing off, let alone have the tamper detection. So some of the ways that I've dealt with these types of situations. So we can potentially use, instead of dealing with the card itself, we can deal with the supporting infrastructure with Wiegand and then distributing those over a wireless technology that we can interact with, which from a detection perspective, we can potentially detect the ESP8266 variety, the ESP key, because there's a new access point in the environment for some reason. Okay. The Bluetooth one, a little bit harder. All right, now looking at the card does actually have some of its unique data that is presented over the RF printed on it. Okay. It will have the unique card number itself and a sales order tracking number, which is pretty pointless for our needs. And then only inspected in RF and not printed on the outside is a unique or potentially somewhat unique facility number. When we present the card to the reader will receive both the facility number and the unique card ID, but we can only get the card ID actually printed on the outside. Now, the HID-Prox2 card, the proximity card, the PIC, is based on the Atmel T5557, which is a readily available chipset, commercially available for other products as well. So we can go to Atmel and buy these chips and have our own HID-Prox2 cards. So they can be used for other purposes. So they're using commodity hardware to deliver HID-Prox2. So now we don't necessarily need to buy the technology from HID. We can buy these on our own and program them on our own if we so chose to. So looking at the data format for each one of the packets, as it were, that comes out of the card has some parity bits at the beginning and the end, and then includes the facility code and the unique card identifier. And in this case, the overall length is 26 bits, which happen to fit nice and conveniently in a single Wiegand packet, which is also 26 bits long. Some of the updated versions, HID Corporate 1000 supports longer packets, requires 2 Wiegand packets, but doesn't add any additional cloning issues or cloning security. It's just longer strings of data. They can have more unique card identifiers and more facility codes by length. It's just increasing the length, not additional entropy or anything like that. Okay, so limited facility codes and limited card IDs. And we can have multiple facility codes in use in any given system. They're just a unique identifier. Typically, facilities have the same facility code for all of their cards, but it doesn't have to be. All right, so how do we start interacting with the HID Prox2? One of my favorite tools is the Proxmark 3 RDV2, and I have used every one of the Proxmark devices that are available, and not all of them are created equal. Okay. The HID Proxmark 3 RDV2 can interact, can do some interaction on its own through some button presses, and it will tie to some software over a USB port, which can also power it. It gives us the ability to interact with high frequency and low frequency tags at a very low level and has lots of capability outside of the HID Prox as well. It is very much a developer sort of debug type of tool, but gives us all sorts of functionality between the hardware and software. Reasonably priced. We used to see the price on this as listed as like $400, but yeah, don't buy it from those places. $250 is a pretty reasonable price for these. And I like these because there's a couple of different changes with the RDV2 over some of the original designs and some of the updated ones as well. The big ones here is we can assemble it in a couple of different formats. We can have the antennas sort of fold back on itself, or we can have them stick out a little bit further. The antennas on this particular version are tuned very well and are the most accurate antennas compared to some of the antennas in the other versions. The antenna designs also use industry standard connectors so that we can go just about anywhere and buy replacement cables. And there's a couple of other features, the ability to have a built-in inexpensive battery, so we don't need to use a USB battery to power it. Overall, I think the design decisions that were made here make it the most efficient and easily user replaceable parts. So this is particularly my favorite. The original Proxmark 3, they run about $225. They don't come with a case or a battery, and the case is almost as expensive as the device is. So instead of just getting a raw board, you spend like $125 on a piece of plastic for the case. Yay, 3D printers! So don't do that. The cabling between the device and the Proxmark device and the antennas is proprietary cabling. It uses USB-A on one end and some other proprietary connector. So if you damage the cable, good luck replacing it. If you damage the connector on the Proxmark, great, have good luck finding another replacement that you could solder on. They're industry standard, but they are not standard RF cables at all. The antenna designs are also pretty poor. The one that I think of is a little bit larger than a compact disc, and the antenna is printed on the circuit board. Not necessarily a great design as opposed to a wire wound antenna such as the RDV2. For me, the go-to is the RDV2. Best antennas of all of the group, more accurate reads and writes, uses standard cabling, and you can get a very inexpensive battery add-on. I think the battery was $4. And has a built-in charging circuit, so you don't have to have additional batteries and additional cables and all that mess. Okay? And is only a little bit more expensive. I've used the RDV4. Again, antenna design here is integrated into the device itself. It's not great. I get significantly reduced range. However, the form factor is awesome. It's small. It has a battery add-on, and with the battery add-on, you can have it connect over Bluetooth, so you can query values and interact with the device over an app on your phone. That's kind of neat. But the antenna read issues for me are definitely an issue, and it's also more expensive. And the battery add-on is like another $110 with the Bluetooth functionality. So yeah, ooh. I still like the RDV2 because it's more affordable and is more accurate. Okay. And the Proxmark Pro has come out within the last couple of months, and the price range is supposed to be about $250. I haven't physically put my hands on one yet, but I look at the Kickstarter project and all of the things that they have done there. They moved back to the antennas for the original Proxmark 3 with the same cabling. So read range is not nearly as effective. So that's a detractor for me. The one that I do think that is neat is that I no longer even need to connect it to a computer or have that Bluetooth connection. It has an onboard menuing system with a little screen. That, yeah. Use the right tool for the right job. Just buy one of each. Right? Yeah, no. If I had to pick, I'd pick the Proxmark 3 RDV2, specifically because of the accuracy of reads and writes, because of the good antenna and standard cabling design, and I could add a battery to it for a very short amount of money. So we can use the Proxmark 3 of any of these varieties with the software connected to a computer to perform cloning attacks. So we present the tag to the reader for our Proxmark 3 and query it with low frequency HID tree FSK demodulate. So demodulate FSK with data coming back from the card. And in this card, we have 06025 as the card identifier printed on the outside. And it does the read and tells us that 6025 is the card number. Yeah, they did some programming issues and dropped the leading zero. So we have the card number, effectively the hex for that card number as well. We can now simulate that card with the Proxmark 3, not writing it back to a new card, just using the hardware device, the Proxmark 3 itself, to simulate the card. It will send RF energy out into the air, acting as the same RF energy that came from the HID-Prox2 card when activated with the RF energy. With low frequency HID tree, simulate the card number that we just read. And then when we present our Proxmark 3 to the reader, it acts as that card and is effectively a clone copy. We're reading the value that is returned, that is no challenge response mechanism, just a unique number, and presenting that number back in a simulated fashion in hardware. We can also write that data to a new card with a special HID-Prox2 card. The problem with the cards as you buy them from HID Global is their T5557 implementation doesn't allow us to write data back. They are read-only. But because they are using readily available devices that are used for other purposes, we can buy cards from other manufacturers that have left them read-write, and we can now write back to those cards with our own data, with third-party magic writable cards. I've had good luck finding these tags by searching eBay and others for writable T5557, even without the RFID. And every once in a while you get lucky and you can find them on Amazon, and sometimes Amazon Prime. So, and not terribly expensive. I've found them for like a pack of 10 for about 15 bucks on Amazon every once in a while. So, yeah, fun stuff. Okay. And we can use the Proxmark to clone that same data and write it to a new card. Place the card on the Proxmark, do low frequency HID tree, clone, and then the data that we wish to write to the card, and it writes the card, and now we have a physical duplicate of a card, as at least as it presents to the reader. We can also use the Proxmark 3 to do standalone cloning of HID cards, i.e. do that surreptitiously while on the subway or near some entrances. Palm the device and press some buttons, present it to the card, maybe bump up to somebody on the train or as they're walking in the building. It captures the card, and then automatically attempts to go into replay mode. You need to have a battery for it, not connected to your computer, but it has a button on the side so that we can trigger the various modes. Depending on the device you've selected, you might want to use this over the USB type of battery. The RDV2 has the ability for you to put a very small lithium-ion battery in it as well for just a couple of dollars. So you don't have to have extra cables, and very surreptitious to use. So standalone operation, you hold the button until 2 of the LEDs are lit. When it's lit, it's going into read mode. You present a card to it, whether you bump into someone that you're trying to get surreptitious access to their facility, and then it will automatically tell you when it has stored by adding the A, B, and C lits, and D turns off, and then immediately starts replaying the card as read, and then just present it to the reader. And if it's a card that works on that door, it should grant you access. Some interesting things to think about here is, in many cases when you're buying the Ep.5 cards, you pull them out of the box and they're sequentially numbered for the unique identifier. Looking at this particular range of cards, we have 15573 in the middle here, 74 on the left end, 75, 76. There's no 77, 78, 79, 80, and 81. Okay. I bet this one turned over in the front is 79. This is looking at the numbers on the side of the card. 15574, 15574. Sequentially numbered cards. So if I scan someone's badge and get the number, and it may not be the badge that lets me in everywhere that I need to go. So wouldn't it be cool if we could brute force, once we've recovered the facility code, and knowing that many times when we buy these badges, they're incremental? So scan a badge, it lets us in the front door, and then it lets us into the interior office suite, but not into the data center, because we don't have the access rights. Maybe we just cloned the badge of the administrative assistant who doesn't have access to the data center. She or he does not have any need to. So let's brute force it. So there's another mode within the Proxmark that we can do with some additional flash of software to the device that we can then brute force those card numbers once we've recovered the facility code from a read. And that is the ProxBrute firmware by Brad Antonowitz, later updated by Corey Harding to be more efficient with the RDV2. Does Prox2 and Prox 1000. Standalone on battery power, not connected to the computer. The ability for us to press buttons, go into read mode, collect a card, press another button, and it will start decrementing the unique card ID as presented to the reader. First one lets us into the building, lets us in the office suite, but not the data center. So we engage the button again, and it starts decrementing the card number. Why decrement? What's the first card you usually add to the system? The one that has all the access. And then typically, when I was seeing some of these systems implemented, your physical security folks that had access to everything, and then you'd add some later that, admin assistants and office staff, and then some IT professionals, and then new people would come on that didn't need access to the data center. And maybe you got it towards the end. Of a card you got towards the end. If you go up, you're just going to go into cards that potentially aren't even in the system. So if you go down, it's likely that you're going to find someone that has elevated access, just due to the nature of how many people start doing these systems. And typically the first card in the system is the one with all of the access. They want to get that done first so that we have a fallback. So you may end up being all the way down. So get in at the data center. Your card doesn't have access. Start decrementing. Nope, 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 nope. Yep, and door opens. So once a second, it will continue to decrement the unique card number while retaining the facility ID as read from the card. It does require us to update the firmware on our Proxmark with the updated image from Corey Harding if we're using the RDV2. easy to do with Corey's Easy Flasher for Windows. I like doing this stuff under Linux, but it always terrifies me when something doesn't go right, and then I brick my device. The Windows one is super easy to use. And we pull the LF standalone firmware full image from the GitHub repository, which I do have the GitHub repository bookmarked with stars, which is listed in the additional resources. So lots of fun stuff there for us to look at too. Once we have the proxboot firmware, hold the button until C is lit, short press button, and then we go and hold it one more time. So we have a bunch of different button presses to engage the different modes. We can still use that original button press method to capture and replay, but a different set of button presses to trigger additional functionality. A bunch of different button presses to cycle through some modes, scan a card, press the button to start the playback, and it will start doing some decrements. And then open the door, and you can press the button to stop. Now, in order to do some of these reads for the HID proc stuff, you need to get up close and personal, 2 to 3 centimeter reads. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do this from a significant distance? Sure, there are tools to make this happen. Okay. The Tastic RFID Thief by Fran Brown of Bishop Fox, with some updates by Corey Harding. And I have built a number of these devices and share with you some of my experience and how we've dealt with this as well. Okay. It does require the use of a HID MaxiProx 5375 reader. This is an actual HID reader that you find installed places that is intended to read HID badges at a long distance, i.e. in the parking garage, so you don't have to get out of your car and reach way out. You can just like take the card and wave it at the window, and it will read from 3 feet away or so. So let's use that read range to read cards from 3 or 4 feet away. I've bought brand new in the box of these readers for about $550. I've bought some cheaper in the $100, $125 range, but they looked like they had been painted with spray paint because they were on the outside of a building or something like that. It was ugly, but it worked just fine. I didn't care what it looked like. I can hit it with another can of spray paint and make it look nice. But typically I put this in like a backpack, so no one's going to see it anyways. So we have a reader. It needs power, and it actually does stuff in a real environment over the Wiegand protocol. So we have some ways, we talked about capturing the Wiegand protocol. We know that we have system on a chips that can do Wiegand protocol, such as the ESP key or the BLE key. There's a bunch of other stuff as well with Arduino-based devices and similar types of technology programmed with Arduino that also understand Wiegand protocol that we can use to capture data, and then we can take that data we've captured to go back to something like our Proxmark and either emulate, simulate, or write new cards from, and read these at a distance. One of the ways that works really well is with an ESP8266 board. One of the ones that we found worked really well was the Adafruit Feather Huzzah, readily available from Adafruit Industries, connects to the Wiegand lines on the back of the reader when powered, and then we'll interpret the Wiegand data, store it locally, and present that information into a web page that we can connect to over the built-in Wi-Fi ability of the ESP8266. I've built mine on those Node MCUs that we showed you on day one, the ones that cost about $1.40 in quantity. The firmware image is identical to the same ones that they use here as well. The big cost here becomes the actual reader itself. The rest of it is fairly inexpensive. So thinking about what we need to do to build this is that we need the reader to have power, and we need to intercept and capture the Wiegand data as it was actually intended to be installed to some device, and that happens to be the Adafruit Feather Huzzah. In this case. So we're connecting the Wiegand output to the Adafruit Feather, and then we're providing power via a lithium-ion battery to the Adafruit Feather with a lithium-ion battery, and using 8 AA batteries to power the reader itself. Now, thinking about this, this is powering the reader with 12 volts, each AA battery at 1.5 volts nominally, maybe up to 1.8 if they're brand new. So we're powering it with 12 volts in a battery that doesn't have a lot of time capacity. I will tell you, the ones that I have built, I went for a different set of batteries because there is nothing worse than having to spend $40 on AA batteries in a bodega in New York City when your batteries in your Tastic Thief run out. Like, that hurts. $40 for 8 AA batteries? Yeah, like the convenience store. Ask me how I know this. It got a rebuild after we were done. So with this, with the changes that I've made, is that I use lithium-ion rechargeable 18650 batteries. So significantly longer milliamp output, so lasts a heck of a lot longer. They're rechargeable. We have a charger in the bag with the Prox, the Tastic Thief. They're removable. The batteries that I have were free because I harvested them from laptop batteries that were being recycled, but we can still find them at reasonable prices, and they're reusable. That also said, the batteries are 3.7 volts as opposed to 1.5. We can use more of them to give more power to the reader, up to 22 volts. The more power we are providing to the reader means more power output and longer read ranges. With this, we're doing 12 volts. With the ones that I've done, adding more batteries in a smaller format than the AA's, we get up to 22 volts, and we can get significantly larger read range. We've got average read range in free space of about 5 feet. That's better than the 1.5 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet with the AA's. Okay. The other design decision that I made was to have one set of batteries. We do some voltage step down from the 22 volts to 5 volts to power the Node MCU or the Adafruit Feather. So we have one set of batteries to worry about. It was a super simple circuit to build with 3 components. And then if we want to use different batteries or a different device that requires different voltage, you pull that circuit, you put a new one in. So if you want to do 5 or 3.3 volts, we have the components slottable within the device, taped down so we can swap those as needed. Super simple. Okay. Some other things that, maybe even some improvements. But we are now able to capture Wiegand data from real reads of cards, and then we can potentially, at distance, and we can take that data and use our Proxmark to update those as well. That's great, but sometimes you just need a simple solution. The Keezy from Tiny Labs is also great and can do HID cards and a couple of others as well. It has a couple of buttons, and it looks like a car key fob, and it's powered over some coin cell batteries. You press a button, you hold it down, and the light lights up. You read a card, you sneak up to someone, maybe with your keys, and you bump into them with your keys, and it records the data. And then you press that button again and it replays it. And you can store up to 4 different cards with the 4 different buttons on these. Super small, super simple for cloning and replaying cards. And they run about $45 from either Amazon or Tiny Labs. It will also do the store of other LF tags, whether they be like those bike rental places as well. It will store, and if you have a writable tag, you can then use this device to, again, write to a new actual physical card for $45. That's pretty cheap on the low frequency side. Super simple to use. A friend of mine said, hey, I need a card so that my friend can come stay in my apartment, and sometimes I travel for work, and my best friend, she's an airline flight attendant, and sometimes she's in town and I may not be in town, and instead of her renting a hotel, she just wants to stay in my apartment. I love this idea, but the apartment complex wants to charge me $300 for a second card for my apartment. $300 for a low frequency card? He says, yeah, it's hid. I'm like, to get into the front door. I'm like, go buy one of these and then clone the card, and then bet you buy one of these and it will be like $60 for you to get one, and then you can have this fun tool. And she's starting to get into the security industry, so she's totally jazzed about, oh my God, I have hacking tools now? Yes, you do. So super cheap and super effective. All right, let's say we find some random low frequency tag somewhere. We have no idea what it is. It's completely blank. What is it? How do we figure out what type of tag it is? Well, we could go look at the data sheets and see how we can figure out how to read it, but we need to know which data sheets to look at. So how do we identify which frequencies are in use? How do we know how the data is modulated? And then how do we even attempt to decode the output? We have no idea, low frequency or high frequency, we know nothing. So let's go down the road of figuring out what the technologies are in use on this card, because maybe we need to figure out where we can present it, and or it might be valuable for us to clone it to be able to get access for other users as well. We can use the Proxmark with the card presented to the device to determine which type of energy it is drawing to power the card using the hardware tune command. Okay. So take a couple of baselines of reading the antennas without a card present. The first two examples are the baselines. So 13.8 for the various frequency ranges, 13.83, 21.89, 24.84, and half a volt for 13.56. Run it again, no card present. 13.7, very close to the original. 21.89, identical to the original. 24.71, very close to the original. Half a volt for the original, very close. Not a lot of change, not a lot of variance. Now, present the card to the reader. Leave it on the reader, run hardware tune again. Some of that energy is going to be absorbed by the card to power it and then play back. So what changes when the card is present? Okay. 11.95 from 13.7, 13.8. 21.21, 21.89, not a lot of change there. 25.08, 24, high 24s, not a lot of change there. 0.16 volt change on the high frequency side. Again, not a lot of change. The biggest change was a little less than 2 volts on the 125 kilohertz side. We've now got a pretty good indicator that the card that we have is in the 125 kilohertz range, and that is significant voltage drop in comparison to the other measurements that we've taken based on the baselines. 125 kilohertz tag, great. We now know that it's a low frequency tag, and we can continue down that analysis. We can do some data sampling based on reads from the cards. We now know that it's low frequency, so let's attempt to read the card over and over again and see what the plotted waveform looks like over multiple reads. We can do that with the Proxmark, have it store the data, which we can then analyze offline to examine the waveform. And that waveform may tell us some interesting things about the modulation type and even some of the data. Okay. So present the tag, do an LF read, and then tell it how many samples we want. In this case, we've told it to use 4,000 samples. And then we'll take that data and plot the data over time to see what the waveform looks like. With the waveform, we can now use the plot to start doing some measurements so that we can determine transmission intervals or the bit stream period, how long of time and how many bits were transmitted during that time, by taking measurements at 2 identical points in 2 comparable waveforms. So by doing some clicks to set our first and our second measurement points. So we've got a waveform that is, for the most part, repeated fairly close on multiple reads. Here's some energy data, here's some energy data, and the waveforms look very similar. Measure between those two points, and it looks like we have a bit stream period or data interval of 64. So 64 bits. Cool. We now know that it was low frequency. We have an example of the waveform, and we know the data interval. So now that we know the data interval and we know what the waveform looks like for a read of that card, let's compare it to some known samples with the Proxmark 3 stuff. Okay. So let's compare that to the PSK modulation. Did those waveforms look similar? No. Now the data interval on the PSK one is 128 periods. 128 is twice 64, so maybe I measured incorrectly. So that's possible. No, it doesn't look the same, so it's not phase shift keying. Here's another one with frequency shift keying, data interval of 8. Maybe I overmeasured. 8 times 8 is 64. Doesn't look the same, does it? No, not the right modulation type. This one is modulate data period of 64 for an EM4102 low frequency tag. That looks better. I mean, I can understand why they're different in that the EM4102 are spitting out unique numbers, and this is a different unique number based on our sample versus the known sample. All right, well, I think that's a pretty close match. So now what? We know that this might be an EM4102, so let's go look at the spec sheets for the EM4102. It tells us that the EM4102 tags can have some specific characteristics for their encoding so that we can potentially return that waveform back to bytes. Okay. So looking at the data sheet, it says that there are 3 encoding versions available. They are Manchester, biphase, and PSK. The bitrate for the first and the second, so Manchester and biphase, can be 64 or 32. Oh, we've seen 64 before. And the field of the field frequency for PSK, the version rate is 16. Oh, it wasn't 16, it was 64, wasn't it? So now we should consider doing decoding for both Manchester and biphase based on that analysis. We measured at 64. Manchester and biphase can be 64. Let's go now do some of that analysis. We know it's a 4102 series card, so let's evaluate the card as a 4102 series card with the Proxmark. Low frequency EM4X series, and we're going to watch for EM410X series cards with EM410X watch. Present the card, run the command, and it will attempt to read the card over and over again, trying to determine the encoding types for the card as presented. It will auto-detect the clock rate and or bitstream period at 64, and then continue to read and see if it can figure out whether it's Manchester or biphase. It does so, and then gives us the tag number for some unknown tag. We now know that it's the EM4102 series with a specific tag number based on doing some of those analysis and figuring out all the various components to end us down that road. Now that we have the tag number, we can simulate it using the EM4X tree, knowing that it is the type of tag that it is, and we have those numbers. We can send that data and then use the simulate for EM41X series tags with the number that we've recovered. So now we have effectively made a copy. We could write this to a Q5 tag using the Proxmark as well and make another actual physical copy. In some cases, especially if we have unknown tags, This can get very difficult trying to figure out which type of tags are in use in the environment because we have to go do that manual analysis. We may never get enough data to be able to finish it. We may not be granted access to the data sheets. They may not be public. And we may never be able to determine the encoding bitstream cases. If we have the ability to acquire multiple of these tags, we may be able to do some differential analysis based on reading multiple that have different values. That said, the folks at the Proxmark forums are continuing to do this type of work and have additional tag types that they've identified. So this may not be as hard as it seems. Somebody may have already done the work for us. We looked at RFID IO tools for read and write access. We can clone tags for LF tags to Q5 tags. We can use the Proxmark 2 and other tools looking at HID-Prox 2, 70 to 80% of the market for access control, and talked about the unique device parts of the identifier in RF. And the unique parts per card printed. We can simulate all of that data, we can clone all of that data, and we can do brute force attacks on those unique identifier. And we can acquire that data at some significant distance by building some homebrew stuff as well. All right. You should be able to get through the low frequency RFID decoding lab. Let's pull up which one that one is. It should be 4.1. Yep. Oh no, not 4.1, 5.1. It's day 5. We're almost to the end. So 5.1, take some time to work on it now. All right, let's take a look at contactless smart cards, and then we'll move into NFC. All right, looking at contactless smart cards, we're going to go over the technology overview, look at some attacks against electronic payment cards with EMV, proxy-based attacks, reconnaissance for reading cards and obtaining information from those cards. And then we'll move into some MyFair analysis and attacks for classic, ultralight, and DesFire. All right, so contactless smart cards in the high frequency range, we see these for multiple types of authentication, payment information, and the ability to store larger quantities of data for potentially multiple authentication-based mechanisms. With the high frequency, we have the ability to do additional quantities of data and bidirectional reads and response, as opposed to the low frequency, which are very simple and spit out individual numbers. We have the ability to perform some cryptographic exchanges with the high frequency cards. We're also leveraging some additional mechanisms to include more security, such as a unique card identifier integrated into some cryptographic functions. So we have some input seeds, if you will, to those cryptographic functions available from the cards themselves. With the intent of being able to mitigate card cloning by preventing card writes and using different entropy into those solutions that we may not be able to recreate. But we'll see some of these attacks in practice. And moving into the contactless cards, we end up on with the terminology for the PIC and the PCD. The PCD being the reader and the PIC being the card itself, which we can potentially dynamically change, definitely when we're going into NFC. All right, so looking at some of the electronic transactions for EMV, Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. The ability to have a contactless card for use for payment. So again, similar type of technology that we saw with low frequency in that having the devices embedded into a card form factor, but in the high frequency range with the ability to do fixed IDs and additional data as opposed to just a unique number. Typically, we're finding most of the applications around the high frequency stuff in the ISO 14443A and B standards. With the EMV cards, specifically, we are not using any cryptographic techniques to prevent unauthorized reads. We're using the methodologies with the credit card issuer to prevent fraud. So all of the credit card prevention techniques we're using to prevent fraud. And we'll talk a little bit about how some of those are happening. And some examples of the cards with the logo for the EMV stuff, as well as the reader itself, the proximity coupling device on the left. Information disclosure with the EMV cards, why don't we just go read a card and see what it returns back to us? It's not using any encryption, so the data is in plain text. So if we can read these cards, we're getting stuff like the payment card number, the first and last name, expiration date, and possibly even a transaction counter. This is much of the data from the RF-based read that we would potentially need to conduct credit card transactions, maybe card not present type of transactions, which most of the processors frown upon nowadays. However, for most modern processing for credit cards, they're using some additional bits of information, such as the CVV code on the back, the 3 or 4 digit code you turn over and it's printed on the strip, unique for that card, as a quote second factor of authentication. And with the RF read for the contactless cards, we are not obtaining the CVV card. Instead, we're generating a dynamic CVC per transaction as a second factor. So we don't have we have the CVC, which is for that one transaction. We do not have the CVV. So that's the protections that we're really using here to prevent card cloning, is the card security technologies based on that CVC versus the CVV for protection. So we allow reads all the time. It's the matter of which data we can collect to actually conduct a transaction. If we can read that, we can now get a good portion of information which maybe we can use elsewhere. So how do we go and read these cards? Well, some of the best ways to do it is to take a legitimate EMV terminal and weaponize it. It does all of the read, it knows how to process the data, and we can get that data outbound. So looking for some of these common readers, the VivoPay 4000 reader, and in this case, this particular one we found on eBay for just under $22 with free shipping. This is some cheap attack tools. And they are out there. You can get them new for integration into point of sale systems. You can get them used. And we're going to use them for aftermarket purposes. We're going to weaponize them, right? So instead of attaching them to a point of sale terminal, we're going to attach them to some other device. How do you think those devices connect to those point of sale terminals? What type of technology do they use? It's typically either serial or serial over USB. We know how to do that. We know how to do TTL to serial conversion. If they have a USB, it's a serial to USB reader. So it's typically coming out as serial data from those readers. Okay. There's a set of tools called PwnPass to interpret the data coming out of those VivoTag payment terminals. So when a card presented to the EMV reader, it formats and grabs all of the data, does all of the checksums for us, and can give us a whole bunch of information about the card. The card for Josh is obviously not valid. and it's also expired. And I thought about this, and it's like, oh, well, what happens if the issuer gave Josh the next card? I know my cards, when I get them, they have the same number, they just have an updated expiration date and a new CVV. Not so much. The last 8 digits of the cards are 9876542. Yeah, I thought Josh put his real credit card up there the first couple of times I saw this slide. It's not. It's not. But we have that as a MasterCard. We have the first and last name on the card, the expiration, and a card number. So that's some pretty interesting information to be able to potentially take one of those VivoPay terminals in your hand or in your coat pocket and rub up against folks' wallets. We can also do so with Android devices with the Squareless application or the NFC smart card info application. So instead of needing to weaponize a piece of hardware, we can leverage the NFC reader also as a high frequency RFID reader directly from our Android application and getting the same types of data there as well. So definitely a handheld piece of equipment that folks would expect to see in an environment. Everybody has a phone. Half of us have Android phones, as opposed to Larry wandering around with a payment terminal. That's unusual. Some other ones too is with the NFC stuff, we talked about doing that proxy earlier, about being able to read, sending data over a low latency link in near real time to, in fact, another location. So we could capture from the subway and replay to the door potentially. We can do so with EMV because we don't have all of the data. We need that CVC as part of the read. And if we just captured and tried to clone to another card, the CVC would be invalid. But if we could read and immediately replay that to an actual valid reader, we could have success with these transactions. So by reading in one location and immediately transferring to a payment terminal with another device over long distance. Absolutely possible. Using NFC proxy by Eddie Lee with 2 devices. It is effectively relaying, acting as a proxy to extend the different distance over Wi-Fi or cellular. Present one to the terminal, and then we read the card for another location and replays it using the NFC proxy utility. It does require us to have some modified ROMs for our Android devices from Cyanogen, which has since sort of closed its doors, and I can never remember the name of the project that they became. Lineage, thank you. Thank you. I always forget. I don't know whether it will work with Lineage, but the Cyanogen stuff is out there and we can probably continue to find it. So it is effectively acting as a proxy to be able to send that over Wi-Fi. Some other things for us to think about. The EMV attacks are relatively easy in that they have a standard. We have devices in which we can interact with them, and they follow the standard, making that easy. However, some of the other technologies where we'd be using HF-based RFID, not so much. They have multiple standards, multiple implementations of the data. So we now have to do some additional analysis to determine these other types of cards. What chips are in use, what modulation types, what's the unique identifier for the card, are they doing any protection or are they not doing any protection? So let's go down the path of figuring out what those tag types are and how we can do so. We're going to do so with our ACR122U that supports HF cards and can act as a PCD or a PIC, so we can actually emulate cards with it as well. And we can do full NFC because we can change roles. So we can read a card and potentially simulate it for HF cards, similar to that we have seen with the Prox Mark III. I didn't mention it when we were doing the distribution of the kit, but the first reason why you guys started getting a Raspberry Pi in your kit. We then added onto it with the ability to do the fuzzing for a intentionally weak access point implementation, and the ability to have a Bluetooth radio for you to do the Bluetooth low energy attacks. The first reason we had these was because of the PCSD and the RFID tools for this reader. They only work on real hardware. The first time we did the class, we tested all of it with our virtual machines. Josh and I both had Macs. We tested them on the Macs, and 1 out of 4 reads would fail. And you unplug the reader and you plug it back in again, it would work for another 3 reads, the 4th would fail. That's something that we figured was, it was a fluke, we could work around, and we could deal with. We get to the first class, and more than half the class has Windows with VMware, and we could get no reads to succeed under Windows and VMware. So we start researching. Turns out it's a USB timing issue, but why it works on the Mac and not under Windows, who knows? We did some more research about the bug reports, and they say, yeah, it's only a problem under a virtual machine, under Windows, and it's also a problem on the Mac, yet we had different results. The answer from the bug report on GitHub was that we're not going to fix the problem. It's a VMware problem. Run it on real hardware. So for that class, we had to have bootable Kali for everyone on a USB thumb drive so that they could complete the exercise. So then everybody had to reboot on a Kali thumb drive. And then like 8 people in the class didn't have the BIOS password so that they couldn't boot off of USB thumb drive. And it was a disaster. So the answer was, give them real hardware. Are we going to give everybody a laptop? Then the class gets really expensive. But we give everybody a computer, right? Raspberry Pi. And then when you leave, you can use that Raspberry Pi for all other sorts of things. Maybe control some Christmas lights, as Jack and I have been talking about during breaks. But we now gave you the ability to do other things with it, so it's really worked out well. This was the driving force for needing real hardware to run this on. So when you're doing your HF lab, you will be SSHing to your Raspberry Pi with your reader connected to the Pi, performing all of the high-frequency interactions with cards on the Pi itself, as opposed to connecting the reader to your virtual machine. So it needs real hardware to run. All right. If we have a card and we have our ACR 122U reader, we can use that to fingerprint the types of cards that are presented to it with PCSC_scan. It sends an answer to reset to get the card to reset and spit some values back, which we then capture and compare to some known fingerprints. Okay. Looking at this output, it's got some identifiers that it thinks it is for this card. It thinks it's a MyFair 1K, MyFair standard 1K, ISO 1443, Philips MyFair standard 1K, ISO 14443 Type A transport for London Oyster, another MyFair 1K, ISO 14443 Type A, NXP MyFair, and the VivoTech VivoCard contactless test card. They're all being identified as likely some sort of ISO 1443 Type A MyFair standard 1K. Yeah, it is in this case a MyFair standard 1K card. We can also get some of this information with NFC tag info under Android. Present the tag and it shows it as being ISO 14443 Type A with the MyFair Classic here on the left. And we can use it to start reading the card. So getting some information about the tag, memory information, and then actually attempting to read the data from the card from all of the various blocks and sectors. And in some of the cases, we're seeing that we have some data, and in some of the cases, the read failed. So With the MIFARE standard, we have the ability to protect some of these sectors to prevent reads unless we authenticate first. So with these particular cards, we're seeing these becoming more and more prevalent, especially here in the US. I see them quite often used in Europe, although we're seeing less and less of them from my experience in Europe for some of the authentication schemes. For example, in Caesar's Palace, last time I checked, the room keys, even though they have a black stripe on the back, they're not mag stripes. You're presenting them to a reader on your door. They are MIFARE 1K. And last I knew, they were subject to some of the same attacks that we're going to describe here. And while you guys are working on lab, I'm going to put my card on and see if it is subject to those same attacks. So we are seeing lots of these. I mean, think about how many cards this hotel issues, and many of the cards in the hotels that I stay at that are using contactless are MIFARE 1K. MIFARE 1K has been used in a bunch of other applications, such as the London Oyster card for using mass transit in London. And this was where a bunch of the vulnerabilities were discovered. There's a bunch of variants of the MIFARE. We have standard, mini 1K and 4K in the classic line. There's been some improvements in security and different applications for cost and how we may want to replace like paper tickets with ultralight, ULC, and then DesFire in EV1, EV2, and plus varieties. So they've evolved over time, and some of the security standards are better and or worse depending on our application. But we're going to look at MIFARE Classic 1K to start. All right, so with the MIFARE Classic line, we do have the ability to encrypt data and have some access control based on the encrypted data on the cards. In order to read that data, we need to authenticate to the card. The reader reads our UID, and then, we're given the UID, we attempt to read a protected block, and it returns a nonce to us. We use that nonce and the UID with a key on the device, on the PCD, to create an authentication token, which we then present back to the read. If we have the right key, we've got our nonces and our UIDs that are correct for that key and for that data, it will allow us to obtain that data and decrypt it. So the unique ID is used, the UID for the card is used to encrypt the data on the card, and then requires a secret key on the reader or within the application for the reader, which is the same stored in the card. So we have the ability to do authentication on a couple of different components, the UID and those keys to decrypt the data. If we can't decrypt the data, it will tell us the read has failed. They developed, with MIFARE, they developed their own crypto standard. We've seen how this goes well for us, right? Known as Crypto 1 for doing their encryption methodology based on this scheme. I have a hard time seeing Crypto 1 because when we start reading some of the papers about the compromise of these cards, they often refer to jokingly of Crypto 1 as Crapto 1 because it's not very good. That said, I think they did a really good job given the amount of processing cycles that they had for a card that doesn't have a dang battery in it and no really big processor. So they had some very tight implementation restrictions when they went and did this. Taking a look at the data as stored in the card in the memory, the MIFARE 1K has 16 sectors, and each one of those 16 sectors has 4 blocks of 16 bytes. Block 3 of each one of those sectors is for storing key identification, key material for that sector, and access control conditions, whether or not we're allowed to read them. And the sector 0, block 0, is set to read only and contains the unique identifier, the UID for the card. So 16 sectors, sector 0, block 0 is our unique identifier, readable by anyone, and is fixed, read-only. For each one of our other sets of the 16 sectors, block 3 contains our keys and/or our access conditions. Are the rest of the data encrypted, or are they not, and can we read them without any authentication? We've got some problems with Crypto 1, affectionately known as Crapto 1. The keys are not terribly long, they're 48 bits, so potentially we could brute force that. That's not terribly long, but would take some time. The nonce selection, the unique number selection, is not terribly random because we can predict the nonces based on reboot times, that answer to reset. Okay. We can do some key eavesdropping in that 3 to 5 centimeter range if we so chose to. So we've got a couple of issues. If we obtain a card, we can attempt to query it with potentially known nonce values based on those resets and attempt to brute force a 48-bit key. Some scary parts with this is that they're known to be vulnerable to what's called the nested attack. If we can brute force one key for one sector, we can use that key to recover all of the keys for all of the sectors. This becomes interesting. So if we can acquire a card, we can brute force one key. We can now use that key to effectively recover all of the keys for all of the sectors, even if those keys are not the same. We have one, and then we can use that to nest into all of the others. So we can do some exploitation with a couple of tools for this. The first one is MFOC, otherwise known as the MyFair Classic Offline Cracker. If we obtain a card, we can then perform brute force attacks against the key. But typically what we're doing with MFOC is we're going to do key guessing on known keys that are known to be default across many systems worldwide. We have a list of default keys, and if we recover one that is not default, we can specify our own and then use that to perform a nested attack. Cool. So we've got one tool to perform the nested attack with known keys, like Bluetooth 000, 1111, 1234. And if we are able to recover a key elsewhere, we can add that to the list. So this actually can run pretty quick, especially if the card is using a default key. It takes seconds to test those keys. So this is where we want to start. Super easy, grab one key, grab them all, grab all the data, and can potentially be done very surreptitiously while the victim still has the card on their person. We don't need to acquire and perform long-term based attacks. All right, so looking at this, running MFOC and asking it to dump all of the contents with the -O. So it attempts to read the card to all of the sectors using default keys. So all Fs, A1, A2, A3, and a bunch of default keys across a bunch of manufacturers. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't recover the data from any of our known keys. So no key recovery, no nested attack. We now need to go the hard way. We can do so with a tool called MFC UK. And I want to make sure that I always pronounce this properly because it's quite easy to screw up and have alternate meanings, if you catch my manner of speaking. So with MFC UK, we have the ability to implement another attack that is not involving the default keys, known as the dark side attack. Effectively, what we're doing here is using some of those predictable nonce values and some issues with some shortcuts discovered with Crypto 1. We attempt to do brute force authentication to some of those sectors that are protected, ultimately recovering the key. And it can take up to 30 minutes, so it's something that we're going to have to acquire the card and do some active attacks against the card while outside of the victim's presence. you are going to do that during lab. Because I have some hotel keys for you guys to be able to interact with, and I do need to get these back. They're loaners, and these are known to be vulnerable to MFC UK. Okay, so we'll use MFOC and MFC UK as part of one of the labs. So yes, you can absolutely do it with the reader. Okay, so it can be done. It takes some time. Once we have one key recovered with the dark side attack, we can now feed that back to MFOC as a default key for an attempt to authenticate to a sector and then perform the nested attack. And then get all of the keys and all of the data and be able to decrypt and authenticate to all of the sectors to dump the entirety of the card to disk so we could potentially write it to something else. So in this case, using MFC UK to do the brute force against the keys, and we were able to recover one key here, and technically that's all we needed to be able to perform MFOC. So it took about 11 minutes to recover that one. I believe these go a heck of a lot faster. All these cards are identical. They're clones of the same card. So, and we've tested them all. It takes a little bit less than 11 minutes because we don't want you to spend all that much time on it. But some of them are faster than others. Now that we have that key, the 6C5B key, we can now provide that from the command line to MFOC to implement the nested attack. And in this case, MFOC specifying a new default key on the command line that we recovered from the MFC UK attack, and then attempt to read the card and dump its output to a file of hotel MFD. In this case, yeah, absolutely, it found that there was a key, was able to authenticate to a sector, and then continue to perform the nested attack to recover the rest of the keys for all of the sectors, and then dump all of that content to a file. Hooray, we have a copy of the card on disk. Now what can we do with it? All right, so taking a look at that output, we have a whole bunch of data. We can see that there was some potentially interesting stuff here. You guys will be doing similar types of things within lab, using similar type of techniques for some other fun stuff as well. So we have a copy of the card on disk, and now we can write that back to a new card. The MyFair standard recommends that we have some key diversification in that we should be using the UID from the card as input into the encryption-decryption function with Crypto1. And not everybody does that. The point being is that every card has a unique ID, so every one should be different, meaning that the data that we recover from one card, when we write it back to a new one, it won't have the right UID, so it will fail because it can't either encrypt or decrypt because the data is incorrect for matching that UID. So while we have copies of the data on disk, the card that we go to write it to, the UID is not rewritable, and the data is encrypted for a UID from a different card. So we need to find a card that's UID writable. We can do so by finding cards from shady places that are UID writable, often known as magic Chinese cards. They are in fact magic because the manufacturers of the cards are outside of the MyFair Classic standard, and MyFair isn't particularly pleased about that because it's using their intellectual property in a non-standard format. We're not supposed to be able to write to the UID, but we can retrieve the UID for this card, and if we have one of these magic cards, we can write the old UID to a new card, and now all of the data will decrypt. In some cases, the cards will present themselves as being read-only to a standard reader, but with some additional commands sent to the card, it can, quote, unlock sector 0, block 0 to make it writable. So if queried by a reader without the magic commands, it will appear to be as a regular card. Issue those magic commands, it is unlocked, and then we can write the UID to that block 0 sector 0. Josh's cost when he was getting them, they were about $20 a card. He said he was getting them from a reputable vendor, and then when I went back to that reputable vendor to see if I could get them, their website wasn't anywhere to be found. So I tried to get them from some other legitimate places, and they had a hard time getting them, and they were still in the $20 range. However, every once in a while I search Amazon for them, for MyFair Magic Card or UID 0. And I think the last time I picked up 10 of them for about $10 from Amazon Prime next day. So significantly cheaper. So they can be had. A week later I go to get them from the same reseller again, and well, that reseller's account is gone. So they show up from time to time. We'll take a look on Amazon later. The only way we can clone MyFair 1Ks is with one of these magic cards where we can update the UID which falls outside of the MyFair specification. We can do this cloning under Linux with NFC MF Classic, and we're telling it to do a write command with the W using the A keys from a specific file. The A keys from Hotel MFD. We're going to write the keys from, we're going to write the data from the same file. We have to specify it 2 times because we could have keys from another file as well. And using our reader, we can write to one of these magic cards and update the UID, making a perfect copy of the card. I've done it successfully. I would say I would do it during lab if my card will crack for my hotel here. I do have some writable cards in my case with UID writable cards, but my room is really far away. So we'll see how much time we have to see if I can get it to work. We can also do cloning with Android MyFair Classic tool. If we have that dump of the card and the UID as part of that dump, we can write them back to magic cards with Android as well. We can also use it to read all the values from a card and look at all of the values, save them, and then write them back out to a magic card with the MyFair Classic cloning tool. We're going to also do similar types of things with the Proxmark as well. In this case, the first step, reading the card, the HF14A read, so ISO 14443 A series read, and it shows that it's a MyFair Mini 3K, very similar to the 1K. And then attempting to do both nested attacks and dark side key recovery with some commands as well. So we can do very similar types of things with the Proxmark against these built into the device. And in this case, looking at the MyFair standard, yes, we found that it was a MyFair. We had some keys. It will attempt to recover keys here as well and conduct the nested attack using one of these recover keys. Once it recovers all of the keys, we can dump that to a file, and we can write those files back out to new cards as well. There's another couple of scripts too that we can do automate this process with the Proxmark to do the nested attack MFOC style and the dark side attack MFC UK style automatically, and then be able to write a new card outbound. In some systems using the MyFair Classic cards, they didn't necessarily follow MyFair's advice about how to do authentication and or use of the cards. Ideally, if I was going to use this for some sort of authentication, I'd want it to do that challenge response mechanism based on the UID to see if it could read an encrypted sector of the card to see if that data was the one that would allow me to gain access. However, Samsung, with their Easy On product with a numeric pin pad, they only read the UID, and if the UID is in their quote controller as being unique and allowed access, it will happily open the lock. They are using HF style MyFair cards, much like they would have used low frequency cards. It spits out a unique number on a low frequency card. Great, that unique number, that's in our system. You can come in. Read the MyFair card. Oh, it has the unique identifier for sector 0, block 0, unique per card. Oh, that's in our database. You can come in. So they didn't do any of the crypto. They didn't do any of the authentication. They merely chose to read the UID for a unique number per card. So that's a particular implementation failure in the Samsung stuff. So doing some analysis of that, it comes with a couple of tags to do authentication to the lock. And what we found was that the tags are not sequential per kit. So when we went to buy a bunch of new tags for the Samsung Easy On stuff, as like maybe we had 10 of them, you read the cards and it would give us the UID. And in these examples, they were not sequential. So something like doing the prox brute style attack wouldn't necessarily be successful here easily. We'd have to brute force a lot of particular options. That said, very easy to take one of these cards and read the UID and then potentially write them back to one of the magic cards where UID is writable. We can also do emulation with our reader. We can read a tag, capture the UID, if specifically talking the Easy On type of stuff, and then we can emulate that data back out with our reader acting as a PIC because we need to be able to change roles, PIC PCD for NFC. So we can make our ACR122U become a tag with the emulated data. Okay. They've done some things on our card to attempt to prevent the magic UID writable type of stuff, but it's all done in source code, and we'll see some ways in which we can change some of those in a source card as well. So it attempts to use some specific UIDs and doesn't allow us to change that on the fly. It is attempting to implement the MyFair standard correctly. In code, hard-coded in code is a UID, and instead of reading the UID from the file, it will use the UID in the code. But if we know what the UID is, we can change the code, recompile it, and make it whatever UID we want. We can also do similar types of things with NFC tag info under Android. So thinking about some of that, we may need to interact directly with the source code to update that UID for doing our simulation and emulation for our new UID that we wanted to emulate. It is trying to prevent us from changing it, but it is all source code based. We just go and update it ourselves with the source code and then potentially recompile that. Might be an option for us to just take the code, add that as a command line variable, so we can just use that from the command line as well. Josh's comment when he was working through this said that the actual emulation, simulation with the ACR122U for MySphere Classic was buggy and intermittent. He said that it worked 1 out of 10 times. And I suspect that it was likely some of those VMware issues that we were experiencing, just like we were trying to use in class. So I bet if he were to have tried it on actual hardware, I don't know whether he did or didn't, but I bet if he were to try this on actual hardware like the Raspberry Pi, it would be significantly more reliable. I bet it was the VMware USB timing issues that was getting him all along. Moving on to some of the other MyFair technologies, MyFair Ultralight, a little bit less expensive MyFair variety, with the intent of it being cheaper as to replace paper tickets, in that we can now do some reads and write to the card to a one-time programmable bit or an OTP bit. So if we were to say use this for transport, and we have 5 rides on, say, the local transportation system, every time it is read, we could set an OTP bit to not be able to be updated anymore, and then we could effectively consume the card, quote, stored values. So one card is good for one read, set the one-time bit, one-time programmable bit. Once you set it, it can't be undone. The card is used. Use this for concert entry. Hey, here's a card, read it. You go into the concert, you can't hand it to the person in the line behind you to read it again because it can never be undone. The intent here was to make them super cheap so that they could replace those paper tickets with a specific lifetime. We've seen some improper implementations of MyFair Ultralight, specifically around the New Jersey Path and the San Francisco Muni, the municipal transportation. They went and purchased some prepaid cards and found that they weren't setting the one-time use bits, so that if you use the card for, say, 4 out of 5 rides, and you had taken a backup with all 5 rides, you could restore that backup to your card, same UID, present it, deduct, oh, go back and update it, now it's back to 5, deduct, update it back to 5. They never set those one-time programming bits to set each one of those rides as being expired. So they wrote an Android app so you could just take a backup and then reflash at will and have all of the free rides after your initial investment that you wanted. They never released the tool. They talked about it though, and some other enterprising individuals recreated their work. And then oftentimes in San Francisco, you would see somebody sort of hanging around in the corner with a sign saying discount Muni rides, and they'd take a new card, take a backup, and then they'd reflash it for you for free, or for a significantly reduced price. And they were effectively stealing from the municipal transportation stuff. So it wasn't specifically a failure in any of the crypto. It was the fact that they never used those one-time programmable bits to mark the card as expired or any of the uses as expired. Whoops. Yeah. So they let us rewrite to those areas that we always could. So not a design flaw, an implementation flaw. We can do similar types of things with NFC MF Ultralight with our reader. We can take a backup of the card and rewrite it back to the card with the initial data set back to what it was. And if those one-time programming bits are not set, it will happily write those back. Some things to think about for you guys doing lab and CTF. The tools that you have on the Raspberry Pi are specifically neutered to never write to the one-time programmable bits. Because what will happen is you guys will be using these style of tools to bypass a system for some parking as part of lab. And if you accidentally write the one-time programming bits, you can never update the MyFair Ultralight card ever again. You can add more parking to it and it will never update the card. You can try to deduct parking from it. It will never update the card. You'll never be able to finish the exercise, and you'll never be able to do any other thing with this card because it's now locked read-only for the entire thing. So we've modified the tool on your Raspberry Pi to never write the OTP bits so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot. As it has happened. We took us a couple of classes to figure out what was happening, and that students were answering, yes, I'd like to write the one-time programming bits, and I'd like to write the lock bits that can't be undone. And now I have static card. I have one of the NFC tags in my box that is set to like 2,172 parking pass availability for your lab. And it's fixed there. No matter how many times I presented, it will not deduct because it's read-only on the entire tag. So we saved you from yourself on this one. I love the iconography on this tool for doing card cloning with NFC tag cloner. Like, we're going to take a one-to-one, we're going to make copies of NFC RFID tags for MyFair Ultralight. One-to-one, so a black sheep to black sheep or cow to cow. With the one-to-many, you know, 1 white sheep to 5 white sheep. Doing the actual read, scan the source tag, donkey to donkey with some cow over here. I don't understand that. The one that I really don't understand, though, is the email the tag. Like, send a bird to a crocodile? I don't get it, but okay, it's fun. Okay, so get a copy of the tag, and then we can now write it to multiple tags as we see fit. Similar to the type of attack that the Intrepidist group did with the New Jersey Path and Muni tags. Another variety, the MyFair Ultralight C, super inexpensive, 88 bytes of storage in 22 blocks, but has the ability for us to do some different encryption as opposed to Crypto 1 using triple DES instead. So no ability for us to brute force keys with Crypto 1. But no support for data protection. We can always read and clone the cards, but the key on the tags, you know, we can't retrieve, so potentially dealing with some UID stuff is problematic. It also supports one-time programming bits and a read-only counter value so that we can have some improvement in the implementation as opposed to the standard MyFair Ultralight for actually doing expiration and termination of actual uses. Okay. The big thing is there, what happens when we have a one key across multiple devices to read these cards. We have a shared key, so keys may get exposed on the reader side for these devices. We do have some tools for working with the MyFair Ultralight and Ultralight C, and we can potentially write these back to new cards that are magic with UID writable in similar type of fashion with the NFC, MFC, MF Ultralight C commands. Okay. Doesn't try to recover the key, it just grabs the data because it could grab all the data and then write it to a new card, magic card with the UID. The final MyFair variant is the MyFair DesFire. The MyFair DesFire ones I find quite interesting in that they support multiple applications. So you can have one card to support multiple authentication types across multiple areas. So we could potentially, I see this as with multiple applications or each AID, they can be configured security independently for each AID. And we could have one card using application 1 for my hotel room, an application number 2 for using for my office, application number 3 for checking my time clock, those types of varieties. So we can have multiple functions in the same card with a pseudo-structured file system for each application. There are a bunch of different varieties depending on the crypto that you wanted to use. The DesFire standard uses triple DES, EV1 uses AES, and EV2 uses AES+. And the attacks are somewhat limited here given that we don't know a lot about these cards. The one thing that I have heard about these cards is that because they are running, quote, independent applications on the cards and can have multiple applications, my understanding is that these cards are the subject of what I refer to as the 5-word horror story. They run a pseudo-like operating system to be able to differentiate between the applications, is my understanding. And that application, or that operating system, that pseudo-operating system, is the subject of the 5-word horror story. I see that 5-word horror story every once in a while when a software application goes to update on my Mac or my Windows box. And that 5-word horror story is 3 billion devices run Java. Okay. My understanding is the operating system for this card is Java. So I think that's where they get their several billion or 3 billion or 5 billion devices run Java. I think that's where they get their large count is from the MyFair Desfire cards running Java to be able to determine their applications. We can use NFC tag info for Android to find out which applications are configured and what type of categories they are for and their intended use. Looking at a couple of these, we weren't able to authenticate to some of the applications because we didn't have any keys for either triple DES, AES, or AES Plus, depending on the card. But we can see some of the applications as configured on this card. On this particular one for this, middle AID, the category is for a hotel. So I'd venture to guess that they use this particular card for doing access control into hotel rooms. And I've actually seen some of these cards in use in some of the hotels in Europe. For example, the last time I stayed in Amsterdam, they were using MyFair Desfire cards, I don't know of which variety, to perform the authentication so I could get into my room. So significantly more secure here in that we don't have a large attack footprint for specific tools. There are multiple applications that can have multiple keys that we need to potentially interact with, although some of them maybe make more sense for us to interact with depending on where they're intended to be used, like that category hotel. That would be the application I'd try to target if it's a hotel room key card. We need to identify the permissions. Can we read? Can we delete? Can we write to each individual application? Are there unprotected files somewhere within the pseudo-structured file system? And if we don't have the ability to read the data from any of the AIDs from the applications, we need some keys. So now we need to guess the keys. There are no known current cryptographic shortcuts for us to take, so it becomes a true brute force based attack. We have to have the card, and we have to attempt to read from the card over and over and over again with brute forcing the keys for DES, triple DES, AES, or AES Plus. And this can potentially take a long time. If we can get multiple copies from the same, multiple copies of a card or multiple cards from the same location that may implement the same key, we could potentially parallelize that across a bunch of different cards to have it take less time. It's still going to take quite a bit of time to do. We talked about some EMV cards susceptible to replay-based attacks and or proxy-based attacks. Some interesting information disclosed there as well. We talked about MyFair Classic and some key recovery with MFOC and MFC UK. We talked about being able to do effective clones on those with cards that have UID 0 writable, which are a little bit harder to come by. We talked about MyFair Ultralight and Ultralight C with some authentication and the one-time programming bits. And then some better security with the MyFair Desfire line with multiple applications and some updated crypto types in which we're left to do key guessing attacks and true brute force to interact with to be able to potentially have any security issues with those cards. All right, it's lab time for the parking pass hack. So for those of you who are doing this via on demand, you'll need your second Raspberry Pi and your reader to set that up following the instructions in the lab workbook so that you can implement your parking pass system as well and perform the same steps for the lab. All right, so let's take a look at NFC and its adaptation for using high-frequency communication for our RFID tags and how we end up using it. NFC gives us the ability to use high-frequency RFID with multiple reads, the ability for us to change direction between the PIC and the PCD dynamically for doing significantly larger data transfers, and the ability for us to use this for some authenticated means for payment card transfers. And we're seeing tons of NFC adoption within our mobile devices for all sorts of fun stuff, whether it be Apple Pay, Google Wallet, and so forth. The big one here is that with NFC, we're talking about some structured communications as opposed to vendor independent type of implementations. So we have a standards-based protocol for doing bidirectional data exchange. They are typically ISO 1443 compliant devices acting as cards and/or PCD with bidirectional communication for up to 424 kilobaud per transaction. And we are potentially changing direction for that data transmission because it is typically one way. But if we change those roles, we can then have the data flow the other way. With these devices, unlike our hotel key cards, these are not powered. They are pulling energy from the read itself in the inductive coupling. Typically, NFC devices, because of the nature of the transfers, are both actively powered. Because we have the ability to perform multiple reads and change those states, we can do significantly different things with the amount of data and the types of data in which we're transferring. The big one here with NFC, it is not so much about the type of hardware and the role change for the PICs and the PCD. And the multiple reads, that's typically a function of the hardware. NFC is all about the way we're choosing to exchange the data in a structured format with NDEF. So the data that we're exchanging with those reads, the potential multiple reads and the exchanges, is all NDEF formatted data in that we have a standard for exchanging that data. I see this as along the lines of the change between Bluetooth Classic and the Bluetooth Low Energy, in that Bluetooth Classic and standard NFC high frequency tags, the data that we include in those sectors can be formatted whatever we want depending on our application, just like Bluetooth Classic. Each profile had its data stored differently or different formats within Bluetooth Classic. When we moved to Bluetooth Low Energy, we had a standards-based with that GATT ATT profile for all of our data to have the same data formats. Similar type of things when we move to NFC is that it is about a transfer of data with standardized formats. We have some specific standardized formats to tell the devices that we're interacting with how to process the individual data. Our NDEF records include the type name format, or the TNF, and the TNF is going to tell us, hey, the next bit of data that follows you should be interpreting in this fashion. Some of the common ones are the well-known type and the absolute URI for the TNF to describe the following data. Looking at this one, we have the contents of the NDEF header and then telling us the record type for our TNF. Looking at this one, we're being told that we're referencing a specific package on Android. And in this case, it's specifically telling, once read with NFC, to open the Android.com package, YouTube. So open the YouTube application. So we can now start to perform actions on the devices by using structured data for us to go and figure out where we should be doing that based on the type name format. All right, looking at the well-known TNF, with 01, we can then have some subtypes of specific indicators on how we should process data with some shortcuts. So we don't have to have large amounts of data for, say, a URL. We can abbreviate that with some of the additional subtypes. So in this case, TNF of 01, and then the URI record type of 55. So we have a uniform resource indicator with 01 for some of the next ones for http://www, 02 for additional shortcuts, some telephone. In this case, we see that we have a URL of healthid.com/key access and a unique string. This is from one of those wrist bracelets that you'd use for if you had a medical condition, diabetes or high blood pressure, those types of things, so that when first responders show up and you've called 911, they can look at your bracelet and see that you have a pre-documented medical condition. Same sort of thing here. They can see the bracelet, they can scan it with their mobile device, and it will take them to the website for your medical record, so they can, oh yeah, so here's all the medication he's on, these are the medical conditions that he has, and so forth and so on. In this case, our TNF of well-known at 55 for a URI. We're telling it that the next shortcut is 03, so we're prefacing healthid.com with http://. Wait, we're accessing health data over HTTP? Wait, wouldn't it be better if we had used 02, HTTPS? Oh, well, this one has https://www period in front of it. Oh, maybe not so much. All right, so that's the one on the right. There's this one on the left of type 55 as well, with a subtype of 01. So we're prefacing google.com with 01, http://www, period. So we don't need to have that in every one of the URLs because we can shorten that with a single byte field. So what can we do with these? Well, maybe we could find some places to put some of these NFC tags with specific NDEF records on them and have folks interact with us. Well, McDonald's in New Zealand started embedding some writable NFC tags in the tabletops in their restaurants as a test deployment. So that when you could take your mobile phone and go and sit down at a table, put the phone on the table, and it would launch an application to tell the McDonald's where you were sitting so that they could deliver the food to your table. Okay, that's an interesting type of use. But some folks just down the street from one of these McDonald's at Playtech, they went to McDonald's for lunch and put their unlocked Android phone down on the table and it did something to their phone. Well, that's interesting. That's NFC. What they found was McDonald's had left the NFC tags in the tables to be writable. So they wrote their own NDEF records to the tables to perform different actions. Starting a web browser and making it go to icanhascheeseburger.com. Oh, because it's at a McDonald's, right? You want a cheeseburger? Yeah, which is a bunch of lolcats. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been to that website. Okay, so they now, great, send them to someplace fun when you put your phone down on the table, but it wasn't what McDonald's expected. But let's maybe send them to someplace malicious instead. They were able to write to the NDEF tags. And this is what I was saying potentially for CTF. There's a hard way and there's an easy way. We can do so with Python under Linux by writing specific URLs and so forth, defining some URI records for our known TNF formats and or with no shortcuts. Or we can actually use some Android tools to do the same, type it in, not have to worry about Python, and program our NFC tags with the Android phone. For CTF, for that particular challenge, the tags that you have that you just used for this exercise you will use those same tags. And don't worry about overwriting them with other stuff. If there's extra data on there, the reader doesn't care, and you have the ability to restore those images back to default from your Raspberry Pi. So using very similar type of techniques to write that updated image back. So now it's a matter of figuring out what you want to do. Where do you want to send these devices as presented to an NFC reader? Some other ones using NFC push protocol for simple NF exchange protocol, so NPP or SNFP, for doing large amounts of data, specifically changing those PIC and PCD roles for doing data transfer of, say, music, contact information, using NDEF-style records over NFC. When Android released their first technology for NPP, if I remember correctly, one of the things that they were doing was, as part of the Google Music experience, they were partnering with like Kesha to release some of her new singles for free. So if you were in like the Chicago airport and you had one of the new Android phones that supported NPP, you could walk up to this billboard type advertisement in the airport and put your phone against it, and it would download the new Kesha song to your phone, like, because that's important. I gotta have it. But what some folks that were in and out of the Chicago airport found was that they left that device writable so they could change the music. You thought we were getting Kesha, and in fact you were getting Rick Astley. Yeah, so why do you keep leaving these things writable? Shouldn't we have learned? So McDonald's, Google with their NPP stuff, they had the ability to change the data that was being delivered. Some other things using NFC with well-formatted records for doing payment, something like Google Wallet or Apple Pay, using the well-formatted data to do EMV transactions with NFC as well. There's a couple of things to think about, just thinking about the structure here. Their use is really about the structured data for NDEF. And I think that there's a couple of interesting things still either way. And I'm not espousing either one of the Google Wallet or Apple Pay stuff, because they both do mostly the same thing. On the Google Wallet side, using NDEF defined records to interact with the readers so that we can have one reader to do both, because it's NDEF. The differences between the two services are that with the Google Wallet, the secure element where the credit card data for those transactions is actually stored in the cloud at Google, which may be problematic if you're in an area that you want to use your Google Wallet to one of the EMV terminals with NFC, where you don't have any internet connection, because then you can't get to the cloud to grab the credit cards. However, you can configure it to be used as like a temporary prepaid card that will sync back up after you have internet connection again. With the Google Wallet, I think this is actually pretty darn good in that they're keeping that stuff that you want to be secret off the device. Because my personal opinion is that the Android ecosystem is thoroughly broken. In that if you're not buying a phone from Google, you're buying it from a third party, and the mobile operators can do whatever they want to those images. If you're getting software from the Google Play Store, there's little to no involvement from Google to verify the quality or the contents of the code for the apps that you're downloading, which may be able to interact with the entirety of the operating system if you've given it permissions to do so, and sometimes without giving it permissions. I'm not a fan of the Android ecosystem for a security perspective, because you never know what you're going to get, and Google is pretty much hands-off unless it's one of their phones, and then they only care about the operating system itself. It comes to you unsullied without all of the mobile operator stuff. So I'm glad that they put that stuff in the cloud and not on the device, because I don't want anything else to be able to get a hold of it. On Apple Pay, on the other hand, the secure element for storage for the secrets for our credit card transactions are actually stored on the device itself. But I can see that might be a little bit better in that the Apple ecosystem, Apple controls everything. They control the hardware, they control the operating system. The mobile operators aren't allowed to monkey with the operating system and put their own stuff in. And they allegedly do a pretty good job of dealing with the Apple Store applications in that they try to make sure that there is at least some modicum of security around those apps, and they're not doing things that they shouldn't be. And they have a method for being able to pull them should they be there. It does require a little bit additional setup with some of the pre-authorization services, but we can use it offline all the time because we have ready access to the information that we need. So thinking about some NFC case studies, we're going to talk about the Nintendo Amiibo figurines. We're going to talk about some toys. But for Nintendo, this particular product was very interesting in that they chose to implement NFC on a couple of their Nintendo platforms so that they could take an NFC tagged device, the Amiibo figurines, read these devices, and then you could have real life to in-game experiences. So if you wanted to be playing some of your games and have additional new characters within the game, you go to the store and you spend $10 to $20 on one of these figurines. So you can place it on an NFC reader. It queries the device, and now you have new characters in game. Cool. They are all based on the NTAG 215 NFC chip, which had some very interesting security features that I think Nintendo intended to use quite well. Okay. So we do have the ability for us to read these figurines with some of our tools, my understanding specifically with our ACR 122Us. Let's take a look at how Nintendo chose to secure some of these. Well, the NTAG 215 chips, an update to the MyFair Ultralight with just a little bit of data and some read-only unique UIDs and one-time programming bits. We've seen some of these types of things. The one thing that they did with these chips is for our authentication to be able to read, kind of like our MyFair Classic 1K, you want to read a sector, well, you need to authenticate with a set of keys. In these cases, with the NTAG 215 chips, you have to authenticate and read with a set of keys, and if you don't have the right keys, it fails. And if you fail 7 times, it wipes the device. Huh. So this is like full disk encryption when you guess the password too many times wrong and it wipes the machine. Yeah, so you spend $15 on this figurine, and then you try to read it 8 times with the wrong key, and now it's just a useless hunk of plastic. Well, I mean, it kind of looks neat on a shelf, so I wouldn't exactly say it's useless. But it won't give us in-game abilities anymore. So that's kind of neat. So they're intended to make it so that if you didn't have the keys, you couldn't read the devices. And if you tried to brute force it, it would wipe them. And then you'd be spending lots of money to wipe the devices. That's pretty cool. However, Nintendo did some things that maybe made a determined attacker want to be able to gain access to it. So by looking at the devices, the Amiibo figures, they did do some encryption on the NTAG 215. You did have to have some keys to authenticate to it. It used the UID as input for any of the key derivation for the encryption. So if you read 2 different figures that were identical, 2 squidoos that had different identifiers, unique identifiers, UIDs, the data was different because it was encrypted using that unique identifier. They encrypted them all in the factory, set the one-time programming bits so that they couldn't be rewritten. So each set of data was unique. But you can take these characters and then used the NFC features of a bunch of the different Nintendo platforms, including the Wii U, the Switch, and the Nintendo DS. So wait, you have multiple devices that can read from one figurine, meaning that they share keys across multiple devices. And then depending on which device you have, there may be differences of different ways for you to update that, including the ability to download copies of the firmware from Nintendo's website. Now, if you can get that data, much like Marcos del Sol Vives did, he went and grabbed the binary of one of the updates for his Nintendo 3DS and reverse engineered the binary, the firmware, and found the ways in which they were using to use the UID and the encryption function for the NTAG 215 chips, and recovered the key from the device that was used to authenticate to the chips. Single key for every Nintendo device supporting NFC on the planet, which he recovered. And now that he's recovered it, he went and created a set of tools so that you could dump your figurines, authenticate to them, and then be able to create new versions and re-encrypt it with a new user UID. So you could go and buy new chips off of like Amazon for $1 a piece, or from AliExpress for about $1/4 in volume. And then you could make your own tags with the official encryption key from data that you've pulled from other stuff, and then you can share them with your friend. Updates to this methodology by Hidden Rambler allowed for the dumping of your items, your characters, sharing them online, downloading new stuff, and updating them to a new key that you bought for $1/4. Like, this is interesting, and now that we can steal all these characters for $1/4 a piece with a very inexpensive app, Tagmo, and share them across the internet. Part of the motivation for the initial attacks for these were that Del Sol Vives found that in his area, the amiibo figurines were very hard to come by. There might be one or two in the store, and they'd be already the one that he bought, and they wouldn't have new ones there for months. So he wanted to find a way to get new ones when there weren't any available in his area. And this was pretty endemic across many of the places that were popular for them, that there just wasn't any quantity. Nintendo didn't release enough of them, so if you want them, you got to go get them yourself. And he did so in software. So never underestimate someone who's motivated. Okay. To get around getting sued by Nintendo, neither one of their tools included the recovered key. But if you know where to look, it's pretty easy to recover because it's out there all over the place on the internet. Okay, so go search for key_retail.bin and you'll find it out there, and it'll be the right key. After that, another company, so looking at these, we had the key, we could interact with the figurines. The encoding process was reverse engineered, so if we had a tag with a new unique UID, we could re-encrypt the data for that new user UID with the appropriate key, so we could create our own new tags. So great, we needed to have actual physical tags, $1 to 25 cents, that we needed to program and place them on the reader. A company called Amico decided this is a great idea. Instead of having to have physical tags, they emulated an NTAG 215 chip in software, and then included all of the amiibo figurines emulated in software with one single hardware device. So you just scroll through the device and you pick it and you put it on top. So they're all in this little battery-powered device, all of them. You could buy it for like $50. You get all of the characters for $50. They could randomize the UIDs and re-encrypt the data, and that's kind of cool. So in this particular case, this is not a specific attack against NFC. It is an attack against the implementation. The implementation in this case with Nintendo is that they had a set of keys shared across multiple devices that needed to be able to read millions of figurines. And they didn't store that key very well. They put it in firmware that you could download from Nintendo's website and analyze some software that you could get for free. If they had stored that key in some sort of protected element within the actual Nintendo hardware itself, it would have been significantly more difficult to get a hold of. They put it out effectively freely available for anyone who had a little bit of knowledge to be able to recover. And I'd argue they lost lots and lots of money because people could start cloning the amiibo characters. Okay. So tamper-proof hardware is lots of fun. So thinking about that, there's a couple of ways in which we can attack NFC deployments. We can send malformed data such as fuzzing. This becomes time-consuming potentially, but there's lots of devices around, so we may be able to parallelize that. Okay. Also thinking about the way in which NFC works and that it sends specifically formatted data that the devices interpret. Well, let's send data that it knows how to interpret and deliver them some sort of payload that has other exploits available, such as malicious URLs, JavaScript, executables, other binary data that is opened within an application that has a vulnerability. So a bunch of different ways that we can deal with that. Android had some pretty serious vulnerabilities when opening some media with the Android stage fright vulnerability. You needed to have someone open some media for an exploit to happen on the device. Well, how do you deliver that media to them? Well, you create an NFC tag that tells the device, hey, go open this application and get your content from this URL with the malformed MP4. And the device, as presented to the NFC reader, maybe going to get your new Shakira song, goes to the internet and downloads the malformed content, triggering an exploit. Yeah. And in this case, setting that up with MSF console using the stage fright vulnerability. Now, largely been patched for this type of stuff, but you start to see the types of things that we can do against devices that will happily load content from wherever you tell them to go get it. So go and take the URI and write it to an NFC tag, and then put those where they may actually use them. I think some of these things are pretty evil. For example, like some of the tables with the recharging stations in them. Oh yeah, you want to recharge your phone? Well, let's put some of those NFC stickers right on top of the charging locations. So NFC opens them, and then you exploit the phones. Such as those wireless charging stations. I mean, she does not look happy. Something is clearly wrong with her phone. I think this one is evil. Put them on the underside of where the drawer goes on your nightstand in the hotel. Where does my phone go when I go to the hotel? Because I use it as my alarm clock. It sits on the nightstand. And what do you think that it would very easily activate one of those NFC tags and send my phone to somewhere? That's evil. I've also seen or have heard of attacks on the hotel nightstands for RFID, for HID, in that they would take one of those Tastic HID long-range readers and put them under the drawer so that when you take your wallet out of your pants at night and put them on the hotel nightstand, it would read the HID cards from the wallet on top of the nightstand. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. So put your unlocked device down. Yeah, my unlocked stuff goes on the nightstand all the time. And then it would potentially trigger that NFC reader, and then my phone would do things that were appropriate when presented NFC tag with an NDEF record to go and get content from somewhere else. We could also potentially start looking at infrastructure attacks, doing some fuzzing against stuff like the various NDEF records, malformed MDEF records. But there are so many possible combinations in the millions. Going and taking a tag and then going up to a payment terminal and presenting your thing to a payment terminal, like make sure no one's watching, and then going back and doing it again, like a couple minutes later, kind of like you had to do with this, but having to potentially iterate through millions of possible setups is incredibly difficult to do. So thinking about this type of attack, we'd have to find a device that was unsupervised and then be able to build some sort of scripting engines or do some simulations against real hardware or simulated hardware in a lab so that we can have hands on to it all the time, as opposed to going into the Apple Store, a billion times to test it with our mobile device. So some challenges there for actually doing infrastructure-based attacks. Having the infrastructure is important. All right, short on the NDEF side, NFC is largely about pre-formatted data and standards formatted data with NDEF across multiple devices, as opposed to the smart cards that they can structure their data however they see fit. We use a type name format to indicate the data type, and then with some of the well-known types for additional shortcuts, and telling the devices how to process the data and potentially with which applications. We talked about Google Wallet and Apple Pay, in which they use NFC and properly formatted NDEF data for exchange for payment information, regardless of where the secure element is actually stored. And we talked about some failures in some of the devices in key storage and implementation failures therein from a shared key across multiple devices, allowing a couple of individuals to start replicating some devices that, based on the NFC technology, had some really great security. Read it too many times and it wipes, but key recovery allowed us to read them as many times as we wanted. And we can do other attacks against clients by sending them either malformed NDEF records or pointing them to content that contains an exploit or malformed data. It's also potentially very difficult to actually attack infrastructure in that there's lots of possibilities for doing some fuzzing. Okay, that's it for today. We made it through day 5.